So much, Colin, and a warm welcome once again to our viewers as we continue to delve into the issues that are, of course, dominating rather the 37th SADC Summit here in the heart of Pretoria. And now we shift our focus to Angola, and right now I am joined by the Minister of External Relations in that country, and his name is Georges Rebelo Pinto Chikoti. Thank you so much for joining us, sir. How has the summit been this week for you?
Well, so far so good. We have been quite busy with the issues of the Council of Ministers, and as you might be aware, Angola is going to become the next chair of the organ on politics and defense security for SADC. So we have been working fairly well with other colleagues, and I think it's been a good summit. Well, it's being a good summit, which is beginning now as far as the summit is concerned, but I also participated at the ministerial level, so we're going into the summit now.
Now, for the media, we of course did not have access to some of those meetings that was held, but we do understand that a lot of sensitive issues were discussed, and we also know that at those meetings you don't always agree. It's normal. That's why it takes so long and so forth. But from your experience, are you happy with some of the resolutions that, as ministers, you have adopted? Because obviously you will be tabling some of those pointers to the heads of states that are joining the summit from today.
Well, indeed, I think that in general we are all satisfied. The only ones that were a little bit of problematic were the ones that are related to peace and security, particularly on Lesotho and DRC, but we have worked quite well, and I think that the recommendations now will be discussed again by the Double Troika, which is meeting right now, and I think that the recommendations that have been made in terms of consolidating peace in both Lesotho and DRC, they do suit fairly well the environment of peace that SADC wants. In general, SADC is a peaceful region, and I think that we are developing quite well in terms of both democracy, regular elections, and stability. Right now, naturally, the challenge is for private sector development and the industrialization of SADC, and I think as well on those lines we are doing very well since the summit of Livingstone in Zimbabwe 2 years ago.
Now, you represented Africa, not just SADC, on the UN Security Council on Africa, and these were some of the issues that you focused on, where you became the representative of Africa on those particular issues. Do you feel that perhaps some of the reforms that were adopted there on that council, the UN Council on Security, are focusing on Africa? Are we seeing success in terms of those resolutions? I mean, now we're referring back to the issue on DRC and Lesotho, where we see political turmoil continuing, despite some resolutions that have been adopted, of course, under your leadership.
Well, I think so. Let's say that Africa represents about 60% of the agenda of the UN in terms of peace and security. We have a crisis in Somalia, we have one in Mali, we have the issues going on in Nigeria with Boko Haram in terms of peace. So we have the Central African Republic, we have DRC, as you have mentioned. There are quite a number of them. But I think that globally, first the African Union Commission on Peace and Security, it does work well with the regions, and then the United Nations as well, they do follow up quite well. I think the major challenge in terms of peace for the African continent is, on one hand, to make sure that the African Union develops its internal capacity in terms of financing most of its programs, particularly in terms of peace and security, and then as well to make sure that as we develop and we confront better the issue of radical Islam, or let's say issues like Boko Haram or the crisis in Mali or attacks that we've seen in Burkina Faso, which some of them have become very sporadic. You don't expect them. People will attack a restaurant. People will drive through the crowd of people in the street. I think this is really something that concerns. We also have the issue of Somalia that has been for quite a long time on the agenda of peace and security of the African Union. But I think what is key is that we develop more resources, more capacity, and make sure that we dedicate more time to the issue of an outstanding force of the African Union. And in that capacity, both Angola and South Africa have worked quite well into the issues of the outstanding force that will develop this capacity to consolidate peace on the African continent. In SADC, I think there is global stability. We do have globally peace in the SADC region. I think that the Lesotho issue has been handled fairly well within SADC. The issue on DRC, well, part of it is being handled by SADC with the United Nations, the Great Lakes region, but as well we believe that the agreement of the 31st of December, which was endorsed by the international community, does represent an issue for peace in DRC. So I think that globally things are well, but the challenges are still many.
Let's go back to the issue of funding. We have heard, repeatedly that a body such as SADC relies on donors and so forth, and sometimes that comes with conditions where they want to dictate to the leaders in the SADC region as to what should be done, how they should conduct the business of the day, and that sometimes creates problems, and it deviates from the notion of African solutions for African problems, isn't it?
I agree with you. I think that the challenge is the one that we're trying to address on the African Union level. The African heads of states have agreed that they would contribute 0.2 of their inputs to the budget of the African Union. That would raise about $1.8 million every year. If we have such an amount of money, then SADC and all other regions will have enough money to consolidate in terms of peace. In fact, in SADC, SADC does apply for funding to international partners, and indeed sometimes international partners would like that the report will suit what they think or what they feel about democracy. What we think is that democracy is not a monopoly of any region, of any country. I think that globally SADC countries have signed the protocols on democracy and elections, so which means that all countries in SADC do go for elections every 5 years. So that is the major commitment. We have signed that protocol and we do want to go for elections. Now, when it comes to funding some of these processes, particularly the Secretariat of SADC, which then needs funding coming from international donors, that's where we have a problem. Because indeed, they would like that the reporting is done to them because they would like us to justify the money they give us, but as well, in some cases, it can be just like they want the elections to be interpreted in their own conditions. But what should we say? Elections in Africa are elections in Africa. We are developing, we are progressing very quickly, but we may not be as good as Britain, which has maybe 500 years of tradition. Some of our countries have got 10 years, others have 20, others have 15, but globally there is a commitment towards democracy and the realization of elections. So therefore, this kind of conditioning when we request funding is not good, but I think that if we develop our own internal capacity, then we will go beyond this problem. We can solve it ourselves.
Now let's shift our focus to your own country. You're going to the polls soon, and your president that has been at the helm for over 30 years has finally decided that it's time to hand over powers to somebody new to lead your country. Bring us into the picture leading up to the elections. How are things in Angola? Are you ready for a new leader?
Yes, indeed. I think I wanted to commend President dos Santos. He's a great president. I mean, President dos Santos became president at 37 years old, and in 1979. The first challenge he had was a big war between South Africa against our country, and he had to stand against all those Western countries, plus South Africa, against Angola. We had the support of the Cubans and the Russians, but he stood. We defeated the South African army on the 23rd of March 1988. Then we had the conditions to implement the resolution 435 for the independence of Namibia. the liberation of President Mandela, all came because of the outcome of the military engagement of the Angolan National Army plus its allies. So that was very important, and I think that is one of the legacies of President dos Santos. We cannot take it away from him. On that point, he was a great president. The second point was, with the end of the international crisis in Angola, we signed the agreement in 1991 for elections in Angola. We went for elections, President dos Santos won those elections. UNITA refused to admit those elections, then we went back to war. And this war lasted another 10 years. And during these 10 years, we had the worst destruction of the Angolan economy, of the Angolan infrastructure. It was the worst period of the Angolan war. But we still finished that war. Once it was finished, President dos Santos was the first person to admit and say all those who were in UNITA, they are today in the Angolan armed forces. All its leaders, they came into government. All its members, they went into parliament. And we funded that process with the Angolan money. Nobody funded that money. I think that all these are some of the aspects of his legacy. Today he's saying, after we have achieved peace, we have done 3 elections, now he says, I could still stand, I will not stand, I'm going to choose somebody from the party. He chose somebody, Mr. João Lourenço, who is the Minister of Defense, with a very strong experience in the party, in the government, in the army, is going to lead the MPLA in the coming elections. If he wins, I think he has a better chance, more experience in terms of leading Angola into a new era. He's younger, it's a new generation, but I believe that President dos Santos and the MPLA, they've done things correctly well, both for the region in Southern Africa, for Angola, and for the party. Now today we are going to face a challenge with other political parties. The best wins, and then we see what kind of government we have after that. But I think that we're all committed to a better Angola, to a peaceful Angola, to a democratic Angola, and all those elements came through President dos Santos, who for the first time said this is the only way forward.
All right. Obrigado, Minister. Thank you so much for joining us.
Very much.
And of course, that was the Minister of External Relations, Georges Rubelo Pinto Chikoti, all the way from Angola. He's part, of course, of the SADC Summit that's taking place here in Pretoria. And in short, basically what he's telling us is that his country is ready for the elections that will be taking place soon in that, of course, a Southern African country that is part of the 15 nation SADC bloc that is meeting for this week here in Pretoria. And as we continue with the interviews here at the summit, we of course gearing up for the heads of states, as I said earlier, who will be joining us later this evening here in Pretoria. For now, let's toss it back to the studio.
Patricia Fisari taking to us live from Pretoria. And on that note,